Thank you for your support and interest in these critical discussions.
Erev Tov, good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Begin Center. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event. I can see a number of familiar faces, people who attend our events regularly, both here in person at the center and also on Zoom, where we have regular programming for English speakers. Those of you who are familiar with our programming will know that since October 7th, we've been doing a lot of events, lectures, discussions around that topic. This event is not specifically to do with that and was planned sometime before that, but inevitably, because it's about relations between Arabs and Jews, there are obviously relevant topics that will come up, and we can explore those in conversation later. But essentially, I wanted to firstly, after welcoming you all, thank Avi Melamed and Maya Hoffman very much for their cooperation, their collaboration, their partnership with the Begin Center in producing this event. It's a really, I think, important piece of work, series, educational and informational, and as we'll hear, that's really what Avi Melamed is spending his time on at the moment. I think it's never more important than now. So before I introduce our speaker, I'll just briefly tell you how this evening is going to run. After some words of introduction from Avi, we're going to watch not the entire series, we're going to watch 3 of the 5 episodes spliced together running a runtime of just over an hour. I'm going to have a conversation with Avi, ask him a few questions, and then open up to your questions from the floor. Get those questions formulating in your heads as you're watching the documentary. There'll be an opportunity to ask those questions. So let me introduce Avi Melamed, a geopolitical Middle East expert, intelligence analyst, founder and CEO of Inside the Middle East Intelligence Perspectives, ITME. He has a history as a former Israeli intelligence official and a senior advisor on Arab affairs. He's been uniquely situated at the intersection of diplomacy, education, and intelligence. Beyond his intelligence roles, where he undertook high-risk counterterrorism assignments, Avi's most significant contribution lies in his commitment to education. Through ITME, which is an apolitical, non-partisan institution, he's pioneered an innovative approach to understanding the Middle East. Its core objective is to nurture critical thinking about the region's past, present, and potential futures, fostering nuanced, comprehensive perspectives. He's the author of 3 books on the region, including his latest, Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era, and he is also, of course, the creator of this newly released documentary series, The Seamline, which explores the conflict in Jerusalem and over Jerusalem. As I said, we're going to be watching a specially created for this event, putting together of 3 of the 5 episodes of the series. If you want to watch the other 2, it's available online for free. We can send you all the link to that website afterwards. If you don't get an email from us, you can email me, paulg@begincenter.org.il. You can also go to the website of ITME. Okay, I'm going to invite Avi Melamed to the podium, and we'll go from there.
Ladies and gentlemen, shalom, good evening. Shalom lekulam. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is heartwarming to see so many people of all different ages and backgrounds come together to learn, explore, and understand more about Jerusalem. My name is Avi Melamed, and I am the founder of Inside the Middle East, or in short, ITME, a nonprofit institute dedicated to providing apolitical, contextualized education and knowledge about our region. I have dedicated my life to understanding and educating about our region and how events in the neighborhood impact Israel. The Seamline is a 5-episode documentary about the struggle over and in Jerusalem. This series is part of a continuum of educational products we offer, which are preliminary, focused on educating global Jewry about Israel in the context of the Middle East. The series aims to showcase various aspects of Jerusalem, offering viewers unique and sometimes unfamiliar perspectives on the city. The series provides a satellite perspective as well as an intimate view from inside the alleys and neighborhoods. The series explores Jerusalem from both a geopolitical and geostrategic context and through the personal experiences of the people living in the city. Tonight, we will screen 3 chapters, 3 episodes, consecutive episodes. I selected these 3 because they are good representation of the overall theme of the series. The opening episode provides the database to understand the rest of the episodes. The second, titled Tolerance and Fanaticism, addresses the many layers of the issue of the Temple Mount compound. The third, titled Fences and Bridges, explores the challenge of coexistence in Jerusalem. I'm very honored that Tali Levit, where are you? Tali, please stand up. And I'm saying this word, and Tammy Levi, where is Tammy? Tammy? Both of whom are in the third episode that will be screened this evening here tonight. I feel fortunate to have the privilege of creating the series for 3 reasons. First, I have the honor of joining a small club of people who get to see their work documented in their lifetime. Second, as a 4th-generation Jerusalemite with deep family roots in the city, and having grown up in an environment where both Hebrew and Arabic were integral to daily life, I see the series as closing of a personal circle. Finally, I'm fortunate for the opportunity this series gives me to share insights and experiences that may contribute positively to resolving conflicts wherever they may be. I want to honor the memory of 2 dear individuals, Amir Cheshin and Jamil Siaj, who are no longer with us. As mentors and friends, their lives and endeavors are an integral part of Jerusalem's history. The production of this series was made possible thanks to the generous support and visionary leadership of generous donors and supporters of Inside the Middle East Abroad. And I'm grateful for them. Please join me in expressing appreciation and personally thank to a few people. Our board and funders represented this evening by our president, Mr. Eli Ovitz. Eli? Ayelet Efrati, the producer of the series, and the entire professional and dedicated production team. Mr. Didier Boudin, our jack of all trades. This is the guy that runs all the night with this camera. And, or as we call him, the person who makes us look good. Special thank you for a very dear friend of mine, Mr. Walid Abu Zaid. Walid, where are you? Stand up. Walid is the man for every mission you have in mind. I also want to thank Paul Gross and the Begin Center staff for their cooperation. Ashira as well, where are you? Please raise your hand, I want to see you. And of course, a huge thank you to my partner in life and educational mission, Maya Hoffman. Maya is a role model for me in her professional and personal commitment as well as her uncompromising striving for excellence. There was a wonderful series, British series called Rample. You probably are familiar with that series. And the lawyer used to call his wife, she who must be obeyed. Yeah. I dedicate this series in the loving memory of my parents, Yardena and Yosef Melamed, third generation Jerusalemites. I dedicate it in honor of the Melamed, Ben Menashe, Basher families who are deeply rooted in Jerusalem, and in honor of my children, Sapir and Nimrod Melamed, fifth generation Jerusalemites. Enjoy the show, and I look forward to our discussion afterwards. Thank you very much.
Okay, I hope you all found that as interesting and enlightening as I did when I first saw it. We're going to have, I'm going to have a conversation with Avi for about 15 minutes or so, and then there'll be questions from you. So have those questions ready. Firstly, Avi, thank you very much for making this film and for joining us, of course. What I wanted to start with was at the very beginning of the film, you talked about your younger years growing up in Jerusalem, in a very different Jerusalem, pre-First Intifada, where you described it as a model of Jewish-Arab coexistence, which I think is hard for many of us living in today's Jerusalem to relate to, unfortunately. So what I wanted to ask you was, in your view, was the collapse of that Jerusalem inevitable? Was that always going to happen? Were there things that could have been done differently, either by Israeli authorities or Arab leaders or both, that could have forestalled that reality?
Yes, that was inevitable, because it goes back to something I said towards the end of what you saw today when I was talking about the fact that in the end of the day, there are larger factors that are involved in shaping the reality. One of the things that we are doing in our activities in our institute inside the Middle East, we all the time talk about the big picture of the Middle East and how it impacts the story of the conflict, how it can impact the life of people, individuals. So, for example, if we are talking about the story of the Intifada in Jerusalem, and you ask me if it was inevitable, and I'm saying yes, it was inevitable. Basically, what I'm saying is an example that there has been, for example, a strengthening of Islamization in the Arab world in the 70s, the 60s, the 70s. There was crisis of Arab governments. So there were different deep streams that basically, in the end of the day, radiated and impacted also the reality in Jerusalem, which, by the way, this is one of the major, I would say, one of the major insight that we always, in our work inside the Middle East, in our institute, we always emphasize that in the end of the day, if you want to understand Israel and the reality in Israel, you must understand the story of the Middle East.
Right, so just as it's impossible to separate Jerusalem from the wider Israeli story, it's also impossible to separate Israel from the wider regional story. Okay, I wanted to ask you something, a clarifying question. I don't know how much everyone in the room knows about these matters, probably some more than others, but let's get some clarification. You were dealing with in your work in the mayor's office, you were dealing with the Arab population of Jerusalem, which is distinct from both Arab citizens of Israel in the rest of Israel, effectively, and also from Palestinians living in Judea and Samaria and Gaza. So can you say something about the unique status of Arab Jerusalemites in relation to those other Arab populations?
I think that one of the most, if not the most unique aspect of the specific Jerusalemite Palestinians is the fact that in the end of the day, most of them choose to remain permanent residents. They could become fully citizens. They don't, and it's very significant to understand why don't they. The reason for that is because that specific legal status as permanent resident enabled them to navigate a very complex multi-layer identity. They are, on the one hand, Palestinians. They view Israel as an occupier. Most of them are Muslims in their religion. They identify with the Arab world. They see themselves as part of the Arab world. At the same time, they are very much woven to a large extent with the Israeli experience, working, counterparts, and so on and so on. So you, as a Jerusalemite Palestinian, you kind of like live in a very interesting twilight area where you have to navigate this very different component of identity. And so by keeping that specific status, they are able at the same time to feel faithful to their brothers and at the same time to keep their legal status.
Right, and as non-citizens, they can't vote in national elections, but they can vote in municipal elections, but few of them do, right? It's not, most of them don't, right? Most of them choose not to.
That is correct, and that was always the case, and that reflects the part of the Jerusalemite Palestinian identity that says, in the end of the day, in that specific context, participating or not participating in the elections to the municipality, we are giving priority to our national affiliation.
Right, right. So one of the, you devoted a whole episode pretty much to the question of Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, and we showed that episode here as part of this compilation. And it's obviously its importance to Jews and to Muslims. How do you see the relevance of Har HaBayit in the current, both in the current conflict that we're dealing with right now and in the wider issue of Hamas, Islamist extremism, the threat we face, the threat Israel faces from those forces? Because it seems like even though Gaza is a long way, relatively speaking, in little Israel, relatively speaking from Jerusalem, it always features in the rhetoric of groups like Hamas.
Yes, definitely. Look, when you look, obviously, right now, the whole situation, the whole war, just as a reminder, Hamas called it Tufan al-Aqsa, which means the flood of al-Aqsa. And we all remember that it's, in the previous rounds, military rounds, Hamas and Islamic Jihad all the time emphasized the story of liberating al-Aqsa, defending al-Aqsa. So it's very clear that it's present out there. But I think also in the context of what we saw in this series, and by the way, remember, that series was done before the war.
Right.
One of the things that I was talking with our guest, Hussein Abdul Hussein, which is, by the way, a very interesting person for himself. He's a Lebanese and Iraqi Shiite. And he was talking about how the story of Al-Aqsa is, in the end of the day, to a large extent, a pawn that is being used both in the context of the inner Palestinian struggle as well as in the context of the story of the Middle East. And let me tell you something, with all my work right now in the context of the war, I was in the States, I'm going back to the States, I did many, many briefings and Zooms and sessions. I explained to people the whole story of Al-Aqsa in a regional context, in the context of the Middle East, and to a large extent, this is something that people totally are unfamiliar with.
Right. Actually, one piece of information that was completely new to me was how Al-Aqsa is not theologically part of Shiite Islam in that way, and the fact that it's become such a major part of Iranian rhetoric and Iranian sort of policy, or pushing a certain policy around the region, just shows you that it's not, that this isn't just about, this is so much about politics and so much about the ambitions of countries like Iran.
That is so accurate. I mean, just today, a couple of hours before I came, I gave an interview to Bloomberg, and they asked me about the story of the Houthis, which I guess you are familiar, you heard about the story of the Houthis. And I actually told him, look, the Houthis are playing the card of Al-Aqsa and defending the Palestinians. The Houthis couldn't care less about the Palestinians, nor about Al-Aqsa. But it goes back to the story of being pawn used for different purposes.
Right. Okay, so staying with the current situation that we find ourselves in, when the final segment was talking about Jabal Mukaber and the relationship and the amazing work that you did, and others like Tammy and Tali who are here did with partnerships between Jews and Arabs in these neighborhoods. Also, cards on the table, I live in Amman and Atzib, so I'm also somewhat invested in this success of this kind of project. How do you see neighborhoods like Jabal Mukaber in this current situation? Because I would guess that they are potentially quite explosive places right now. And if that's the case, I mean, you can tell me if it is or isn't, but if it is the case, what can be done to diffuse those kinds of tensions?
Well, you know, Paul, I want to take it to a larger, wider perspective, and that is talking about the whole story of the conflict and some narratives and concepts that relates to it. And in every single session that I have with audience, whether they are American Jews, global Jewry, policymakers, media, and so on, people ask me, what's the solution? And what about peace? And I want to say something about it. I've been saying that for many years, and up until now, I was very accurate. Don't talk about peace because it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Not because I don't want peace. It's because the two people are not in a place where they could have peace. Rather, I'm saying once you are putting that away from the discussion and you are talking about what I call practical arrangements on the ground, referring also to the story that we saw, Jabal Mukaber and Talpiot Mizrach, this is the only baby step that you can take towards maybe building something that is better. And I think that it's very significant for us, if particularly right now, as we are talking about the story of the war, one of the things that I'm being asked is the story of the day after in the context of Gaza. I'm taking it to a larger perspective. It's the same idea. We have to look at something that in the end of the day has to be built in a baby step. It has to be built in a frame of regional envelope. It has to involve larger players in the region in the end of the day. And it has to be some sort of like a scaffolding that you build upon those scaffoldings, layers upon layers, very slowly, very gradually, a process that builds the mutual trust that is very much needed for the next phase. And I think that this is the large, I would say, one of the major issues that we are reflecting in our work with audience around the world. Sometimes when I'm saying that to people, the first reaction is quite difficult because people say, whoa, what do you mean there is no peace? But then I'm saying, look at this as an opportunity, not as something that is blocking, but as something that is opening. If you push away this thing to the side, and now you say to yourself, okay, if this is not achievable, what is achievable? And things could be achievable if you are doing that gradually and the baby steps that I mentioned before. And one more note in that regards that I want to say. When I was doing that work in those rough years in Jerusalem, and you may remember that my first question was about the naivete. We shouldn't be naive. We shouldn't confuse between pragmatic needs and real reality and understanding what reality is made. So it will kind of like, will give us a better odds for success if we are not going to subscribe ourselves to the concept of naivete. We have to be very realistic when we are dealing with it.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that the audiences, American audiences, will often react in that sort of like shocked way, because I think that one of the differences between whenever I speak to American Jews of whatever political affiliation, actually, and the difference between them and speaking to Israelis is that often for Americans living abroad, not Americans here, I should say, for those Americans here, but Americans living in America, that it's very, they look at it in this very sort of black and white way of like, either we make peace or we don't make peace. I think people living here are more like, are by necessity have to think about the actual day-to-day reality. And I was struck by what the Mukhtar of Jabal Mukaber said to you when he said, I don't deal in big politics. I deal with, you know, can we get more kindergartens built and more schools built? And is that the key for you, the secret to sort of finding a way through this, the sort of dealing with the day-to-day issues, the achievable things?
This is definitely one level, one component, because in the end of the day, I'm going back to what I said. The Middle East reality shaping the reality of Israel and shapes the reality of what's going on in Jerusalem. Remember what I said in the concluding part. Sometimes with all the good intention, there are bigger players that are involved, and we see that quite often and unfortunately in a negative way. But at the same time, you could see that people like Tami and Tali and Mukhtar Mahmoud and others have the ability to make their small changes in their own environment. It is not going to end conflict. I said that very specifically. It's not going to resolve conflict, but it's going to create some different environment, different situation, different conditions that could be at least for the local communities, and now we are talking about Jerusalem, to find some way in the end of the day to live within a framework, within an envelope, which is enormously turbulent. And I think that this is something very significant. So I think that the most significant messages that I want to carry out is the understanding of the impact of the Middle East on the story of Israel the understanding of the need of information and knowledge. You talked about it very accurately when you say there is this black and white perspective. It's not black and white. There are many, many subcolors. This is one of the major things that we are all the time emphasizing. And I can tell you right now, I just came back from the States for almost a month of many sessions and many briefings about the war. I was doing, and I'm doing that all the time also in Zoom. And there is one very clear thing that comes time and again, and this is the deep need of people in education, in knowledge, in understanding, something that brings to the picture the whole many pieces of the puzzle and create something that makes sense. This is what we are doing. This is what has to be done.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's get some questions from the audience. Milia, my colleague Milia is going to be at the side with a microphone for those that need. I see some people leaving now. If you leave now, firstly, you're going to miss some good questions, but also please do so with a minimum of interference in other people, and also grab a goodie bag as you leave. Everyone's going to get a goodie bag outside, so make sure you don't miss those that are in the lobby as you leave. Okay, yes, the gentleman here, yes, with the glasses.
Just one short note. A question is a short sentence that ends with a question mark.
That's even with all the words of wisdom that Avi said, that's possibly the most important thing he said in this evening. Yes, sir.
My name's Mike, and I do have a very specific question, but first the background. I live 50 meters from the seam line. Very interesting. I'm probably the only person ever to have physically walked the entire seam line through Jerusalem. It's about a 25-kilometer walk. Recommend it, but it's very hard. Sometimes you're going through bushes, sometimes you're going under freeways, sometimes you're going through people's backyards. Very interesting. Okay, but I wanted to follow up on one thing you said about citizenship. I spent some time in Beit Safafa talking to people there. In case you don't know, Beit Safafa is split. On one side of the railway, you're an Israeli citizen. On the other side, you're not. I appreciate what you said about they have the option of becoming Israeli citizens, but it doesn't make sense, it seems to me. Like, if Israel really says that Jerusalem is part of Israel, then why has it got two classes of citizenship? One, people born to Israeli citizenship, and one not. Would you not agree that, in fact, that it should be changed and it would help, maybe that's a different question, that East Jerusalem, people born in East Jerusalem are necessarily, unconditionally given Israeli citizenship?
So just to clarify, you're saying that your question is whether people born in Jerusalem, Arab born, should automatically be given Israeli citizenship?
I know conditionally they are.
I see.
I'm saying automatically.
I see.
This is part that goes back to what I said before when I was talking about the very unique situation of Jerusalemite Palestinians. To a large extent, it's a game that both sides are satisfied with. Israel offered the option for them to become fully citizens. Most of Jerusalemite Palestinians, for their own reasons, as I said before, prefer to stay in this legal status of permanent residence, because in the end of the day, there is a very small differences, roughly speaking, between that status and status as citizens. So it's a kind of like a game that both sides basically are playing it for their own interest.
Okay, yes. Let's take from, let's have, yes, Karen, let's get a lady before lest I be accused of only choosing men.
Hello. First of all, I'd like to say on.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. It's been a fantastic evening and incredibly interesting. My question obviously covers the situation we're in now. I look at this conversation between the Arab lady and the Israeli lady, and if it had been before October the 7th, my heart would have lifted. And I'm sure, like everybody here, I would have felt really hopeful and inspired. My question is this: these people are not the people. These people, we fully believe, want peace with us, and hopefully most of us want peace with them. That's not the problem. The problem is the extremists and how we can deal with extremism on both sides, and how and whether in these dark days you still are hopeful, and if so, how you see things moving forward.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, that's correct. I mean, we unfortunately live in a situation where you see extremists that are basically dictating their agenda. It is difficult times for many people, both Jews and Arabs as well, Israelis and Palestinians. And it's a long way. There is no shortcut. It has to do with many things like education, like politics, like economy and other things. But I do think that one of the things that we cannot allow ourselves is to lose hope. Because I think that when you see people that, you know, again, I'm going back to the small, quote unquote, example of small neighborhood in Jerusalem, Jabal Mukaber and East Alpiot. And you see that people in the end of the day, ordinary people, can make difference even in the small scale. This is something that I think is a source of strength and source of a hope. Yet again, to be realistic, not from a place of naivete, understanding the challenges that we are facing.
Okay, I'm going to take one from this side. The gentleman here, the beard. Yes, sir.
Thank you again for the wonderful lecture and
Wait,
thank you again for everything you did.
You didn't eat, huh?
Okay.
Tonight?
Now, according to Islam, peace is the second treaty.
can you speak closer to the microphone? Sorry.
According to Islam, peace is the second treaty in importance. The lowest one is the Hudna al Tahdiyah. The second one, Salam, and the third one is the Sulh. So, having said that, put peace aside, we have peace treaties with Jordan and Egypt. So, how do you think we should relate to those treaties as illusions, as something that can be lost in a second in the future?
Look, I mean, when you look at the whole historic experience of mankind, not only in the context of the Middle East, you find many situations where there used to be peace and then there was a war, and vice versa. There used to be a war and then there was a peace. We are not exceptional in that regard. I do believe, however, when I look specifically talking about Jordan and Egypt, for example, that I do think that we are looking at something that is lasting. I don't know to say to what extent, I don't know to say if it's going to be forever, but when I look at the conditions and the needs of the players involved, Egypt and Israel and Jordan, in the end of the day, I do identify that there is a long-term strategic need to keep that peace. And we should remember, we have peace with Egypt now for almost 50 years. We have peace with Jordan for 40 years, and there has been many, many challenges. In each and every one of those challenges, those peace agreement could easily collapse. I mean, right now, we see in the context of the war in Gaza, we see what happens in Egypt. We see what happened in Jordan. There is a lot of inner turbulence and bubbling of people that are basically calling for abolishing the agreements. But the agreements are there because they reflect, in the end of the day, at least for now, an understanding that those agreements serves long-term strategic interest. Is it forever? I don't know to say. Is it is it something that is in cement? I don't know to say. But this is what we can see today, at least for the feasible future.
Thank you. Gentleman there.
First of all, thank you for the very interesting and enlightening film. There is a question at the end of what I'm about to say, but I have to say it.
Please hold the microphone close so we can hear it.
Sure. So there is a question at the end, but I have to say what I'm about to say. The Mukhtar was complaining about 40% of the population getting 4% of the benefits. As far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, the Arabs in East Jerusalem in general do not pay taxes, as a result of which they do not get services. Double standards in the treatment of East and West Jerusalem by the municipality. If the Jews do something illegal, they get whacked on the head. Arabs very often get away with it and nothing happens. A wishful thinking on the part of the Jews, which has been proven by October the 7th events. We speak what we think. We engage in our actions out of the best of our intentions. I wish this were reciprocated on the other side.
What's the question, please?
I'm coming to it. I'm coming to it.
Okay, please.
Double speak. Again, David Lamb wrote a book called Arabs. Okay, you want the question? I'll give you the question.
Please, just because we're, sir,
Okay.
no disrespect, but we don't have much
Okay,
time and I want to
okay.
get other people's questions.
Okay, the Temple Mount. Why are the non-Muslims not allowed into the Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock? I was told by one of the guides that it was a decision not by the Waqf, but by the Israeli government. Is this indeed so?
Look, to the best of my knowledge, non-Muslims are going to the Temple Mount compound. They are going through in a frame of regular visits or hours of visit. It has to be coordinated. I don't know to say whose fault is that, and that's the knowledge that I have. You may have a different knowledge, but this is the knowledge that I have. That's the knowledge that I have.
Oh, okay. Okay, this lady here. Yes.
I have a question about some of the citizens that you didn't mention here that are also not Jewish, the Druze and the Bedouins and the Christians that live here. And what role do you foresee them playing that could help in this forward-thinking peace process?
Well, these are different communities, and relatively they are less relevant in the context of the story of Jerusalem per se. I mean, the Druze community mostly lives in the northern part of Israel. We got the Druze in the Galilee who are Israeli citizens. We got the Druze in the Golan Heights who are permanent residents. The Bedouins also lives in the south or in the north. It's less relevant in the context of the story of Jerusalem. So these are less relevant communities.
Okay, yes. Yeah, the front. Wait, can you wait for the mic, just so everyone can hear?
Thanks for a great presentation and beautiful filming. Hamas has called what they're doing the Al-Aqsa storm. What do you think of a potential Israeli response that includes a call for Jewish and Muslim prayer together for peace on Har Habayit?
I think that's a nice initiative. The only question that I ask is it going to be the Jewish Sephardic or Ashkenazi? Look, no, thank you for your question. Look, it goes back to what I said. Those are all wonderful things. Don't get me wrong. I really wholly support and identify with that. We need to be realistic in understanding the impact and what we want to achieve. But I welcome any kind of positive action that contributes even something small to make some small difference. In the end of the day, I'm a person that believes in these small changes that has been made on the ground, including something like that. I'm Sephardic, by the way.
Okay. Okay. There's a lady at the back. There's a lady here with a hand up very high. Yes. You with a tartan hat. Wait. Can you wait for the mic?
I work with an Arab family from Beit Hanina, north part of Jerusalem. My question is, okay, and they do not consider them Arabs. My question is, are all Arab-speaking Muslims consider themselves, identify as Palestinians, and are all Arab-speaking Muslims considered Arabs?
I'll try.
They're not all Arabs and they're not all Palestinians. So
Yes.
I don't know how you distinguish.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'll try to very shortly explain because I understand it, because sometimes it's very confusing. Muslims are some 2 billion people are Muslims. When we are talking about Muslims, we are talking about religion. Arabs is ethnicity. The Palestinians, most of the Palestinians in their ethnicity are Arabs, and most of the Palestinians in their religion are Muslims. However, most of the Muslims and most of the Arabs are not Palestinians. If it helps you to understand, if I was explaining it clear.
Okay, let's take some questions from higher up. There's a few questions here. The gentleman yes, sir, with the glasses. Just a second.
He doesn't need.
I guess you don't need, but.
My question is, beautiful forum here. Tell us about your most recent experiences giving such a presentation in Arabic to the Arabic-speaking community.
Well, I'm being quite often interviewed to international Arab-speaking medias like Al Hurra, like, you're talking about Israel? Well, this is less about speaking to, it's about speaking with or talking with. I'm not lecturing to Palestinians. I have a lot of discussions with many people in the Arab world. This is what I'm doing professionally because I'm a Middle East expert, and this is what I'm doing. I have a lot of discussions with these people. I'm not lecturing at them. So I'm not sure what exactly are you interested to know.
Secrets here, but is it necessary to have these kind of thoughts? Is it necessary to be secret in the Arabic-speaking communities? Have this kind of presentation in Arabic-speaking communities, and I don't want to get away with it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it's a reference to the point that some of the Arab women who were involved in the dialogue had to keep it secret from their families. Was that the reference?
That's what initiated it. In fact, it's a broader question of when the Arabic-speaking community cannot keep it a secret, maybe that's when things will advance more. But I was interested to hear your opinion. I didn't want to slip by it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I didn't understand it before. Look, I understand it, and I think that Tammy was saying that before. She said, look, in a way, it's a little bit disturbing because the Israeli side are coming openly to the discussion while the other side is basically concealing that. It is a given. It is a given situation. Is it the perfect one? I don't think so. I do think and hope that when two sides that have conflict come openly to the table and are talking, I think that's the preferable situation. It's not something that I can impose. And I think that Tammy was also referring to that very well in her explanation. She can never dictate, sort of speaking, to the other side, what's the level of exposure they're willing to conduct. It's a given situation. Is for itself, it may be disappointing, but it's not a reason not to do. Not to be engaged in such a dialogue.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Lady, yeah, I can't quite see. Oh, yeah. Hi. Sure.
I believe it was the second film, you said that the Palestinians who were involved in violence were not only rebelling against Israel as an authority, but they were rebelling against the traditional Arab culture, the political structure in their own community as well. At least that was my understanding. And I'm curious what you think the catalyst was for the breakdown of respect on a neighborhood level of their own patriarchal authority structure.
Well, actually, what I said that is one of the features of this intifada was that they were rebelling also against the traditional leadership. But they were rebelling first and foremost against the Israeli occupation in their perspectives. And one aspect or one feature of their rebellion was also that they basically challenged the traditional leadership. There has been many ingredients that fuel that process. I was alluding to some of them before, and I reiterate. When we look at the story of the Intifada in Jerusalem, there are much bigger circles that in the end of the day, regional one. That's the reason I was emphasizing the whole thing of understanding the Middle East is critical if you want to understand the Israeli reality. Like, for example, the rise and strengthening of Islamization in the Arab world in the 60s and the 70s, the growing challenges in the Arab world and the collapse of Arab nationalism, Arab pan-nationalism, the growing economic challenges that were reflecting and radiating also on the Palestinians themselves. So there has been many different factors. Some of them were domestically, but the biggest one in the end of the day basically were those major aftershock waves that were radiated from the Arab world, from the region, and they basically shaped the change within the Palestinian young generation. I can tell you that early back day in the 80s, before my position here in Jerusalem, my position was in different parts of the West Bank. And in a very short period of time, and I've been to different places in the West Bank, Hebron and Ramallah and Kalkilia and Tulkar and places that are different one from the other, I could see how those aftershock waves are basically reaching to this shore and generating this beginning of change, resulting in 87, the outbreak of this intifada. It's always about these large factors that in the end of the day generates those wheels.
Okay, right. We have a lot of questions, a lot of hands up, and unfortunately not enough time to get through all of them, but let's see what we can do. The gentleman here with the glasses, yes.
Thank you for creative and legible power. This is my first time learning about news. Wow, back see your article and other. Two questions. Can you tell us briefly your October 7th experiences from what it was like for you to hear about the series of events, and can you explain to the best of your ability how Israel failed so badly in our response? I'm curious what you would say.
Yes, as you could understand, each one of those questions takes a seminar as an introduction. But I'll refer to the first question because it's interesting. Early morning, Saturday, October 7th, Maya went to the synagogue. I was still sleeping. She came home and she woke me up and she said something happening in the south. About an hour later, I started a marathon of interviews. I got, phone calls from CNN and Sky News and I-24, and since then I've been kind of like engaged in this almost endless marathon of interviews and briefings providing to different audiences, to the point, at some point it became like a roller coaster. And I think it was 10 days into the war. I had a very unique and exceptional interview, and amazingly, with the BBC. The BBC, that was a very interesting interview because the reporter, she took the conversation to something that was very interesting. She basically said, look, I heard you, I read your stuff, but she said, I want to talk to you about yourself on October 7th, like what you asked right now. And I said, something interesting happened to me on October 7th. Shortly after it started, I made a deliberate inner decision to cut myself from the social media. I totally cut myself from the social media. Deliberately. And what I was trying to do was to focus as much as possible to stay cold, because I understood that if I won't be able to stay cold, I won't be able to refer to the situation in a way that could offer people some understanding. And this is my job. And
You mean if you get too emotionally?
if I would get too emotionally, and you know, it's interesting because in the hundreds of briefings that I was doing since both through Zoom as well as in person in the States, many times people told me that that attitude helped them because it's kind of like leaving the emotions on the side. And for me, that was definitely a shelter. That was something that was providing me the shelter from dealing with that. I watched the terrible documentation of what happened in October 7th. And it was very clear to me that I must continue and try to do this block between what I feel and the emotions and between the ability to provide the analysis, to answer people's questions and to provide them. So in a way, the fact that we, myself and Maya, in our work as educational, mission, we kind of like focused on that, helped us to navigate this critical phase. I think I'll keep it to myself.
Okay. Okay. Right, let's have we're going to have one last question. Yes, in the front there, yes. I'm sorry, everyone else. Everyone had questions that didn't get asked at the end. I'm sure you can approach Avi at the end and
Maybe
ask
we
him.
should do replay, but then
right,
you have to bring
exactly.
the food. I'll bring the wine.
Ask another question, but now that I'm looking at the screen again, and you're standing on King Hussein's unfinished palace, why has it never been developed? I mean, there's so much building going on in Jerusalem. How come that's been left alone?
Up until not so long ago, this was the property of the Hashemite kingdom. It was the property of the king. So here is an answer why wasn't it developed. I personally would like to live there. It's a great place. You don't need air conditioning. You get a great view. It's a perfect place to live.
Okay, I want to thank Avi Melamed very much, and
you.
everyone else involved in making the film. Thank you all for coming.